If you want to be healthier, yet you just don't know what to do, all these shows telling you this and that, but nothing seems to work. Well, listen close. Golden State Media Concepts has got something great for you. The Health and Wellness Podcast dedicated to workout trends, healthy eating habits, diet, and everything about healthy living. Join us in our banters as we help you not just live life to the fullest, but live it to the healthiest.
Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Health and Wellness Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Alex. Today, I want to talk to you guys about pro and prebiotics. So you've probably already heard of probiotics as they can relate to helping you out when you're on antibiotics, but it can also help out your body's immunity and do some other great things for you. So we're going to talk about specifically what probiotics are made of and how that really works, and go from there. So first up, what are probiotics? So probiotics are actually live microorganisms, including bacteria and yeast, that can really help out your body when you consume them or when you apply them to your body. A lot of them are already in your body naturally, and you just supplement them really with things that you eat or supplements that you take. So you can find them in yogurt, a bunch of different other types of cultured dairy like kefir. You can find it in fermented foods like sauerkraut and kimchi, or even in kombucha. You can also get it from dietary supplements, and even sometimes beauty products. One of my face washes that I got online from Ipsy does have probiotics in it. So I get those randomly, they pick them out for me, but I did notice that when I washed my face today. So what types of bacteria are in probiotics? Well, you can have good bacteria and bad bacteria in your body. So first off, I don't want to freak anyone out. When I say bacteria, I don't mean that it's the type that gives you strep throat, per se. I'm talking about different types of bacteria that live in your body and on your body that keep everything going the way that they should. So for example, you have one type of bacteria that is in your mouth that combats yeast. So you have yeast in your body as well naturally. Yes, the kind that can cause yeast infections. Now the way that this normally works is that the bacteria keeps the yeast in check. So that good bacteria is there. Don't worry, brushing your teeth and stuff is not going to knock it away. It usually has to be chemically altered by like some kind of a pH change, or specifically taking antibiotics that can do it. Those are two very common types of disruptions for the yeast and bacteria in your body. And so whenever that happens, you have one of them that's out of whack with everything else. So for example, say you were to go in and take antibiotics for something going on in your GI tract. So you're on these antibiotics and they're really high powered, and everything seems to be going well with the antibiotics. You're taking it with food and everything like you're supposed to. And you're taking your probiotics. However, you're taking your probiotics and the antibiotics at the same time. Antibiotics tend to kill probiotics. They kill that good bacteria along with the bad bacteria a lot of the time. So, in that way, if you take your bacteria pill, your probiotics, and you go ahead and take your antibiotics at the same time, well, think of those bacteria as being settlers. So if you're playing a game like any of the Sid Meier's Civilizations games, I love those, you're essentially taking a little settler unit, and they don't have any way to defend the colony that the bacteria is. So you are taking so many colony forming units. That's how many bacteria essentially that you are having. Think of that kind of like how you take vitamins and stuff in milligrams. Think milligrams, micrograms, and colony forming units. So that's kind of the difference right here. So you are taking what is actually called a colony, and you're taking these little settlers and you're swallowing them, and they have no way to defend themselves on their voyage to this new place that they're supposed to settle in your gut. So normally that would be okay. They could probably handle that just fine if you were just taking these normal daily probiotics. However, if you swallow another pill of antibiotics along with it just because it's medicine time, then you have a problem, because antibiotics are essentially mercenaries who were just sent in there to take out everyone that they see. So once that antibiotics gets into your stomach, it's going to see that the probiotics are also there, and their gel caps are going to dissolve for the probiotic, and then they're essentially all just adrift at sea and are being picked off by these antibiotics. So if you think about it that way, it's not a great ecosystem or great environment for these guys to be in. So make sure that you do take your antibiotics and your probiotics at least 2 hours apart to avoid any problems. Because not only are those antibiotics going to attack those probiotics, but you've completely canceled out what you sent the probiotics in there for to begin with. They're dead before they have even started, so you might as well have not have taken them. So make sure that you do stagger those and give those colony forming units the best chance possible to do their jobs. You want to make sure that they make it all the way to where they're going to establish these colonies, and that they get to establish these colonies of bacteria in your body. So definitely also take the antibiotics. Talk to your doctor about it. If you're going to be on antibiotics, ask them if probiotics may be helpful for you, and if any of the things you'll be taking may interact with your medication that you may also be on, any other types that you may be on, and go from there. Also, you want to see how far apart for the specific type of antibiotics you're taking. So in the past, my doctors have told me to take them at least 2 hours apart, but that's might also depend upon how strong the antibiotics are. I'm not entirely sure, or how long lasting they are. So definitely check that out, because just like human variation, these types of bacteria are all different, and that is what probiotics are. So the strain is very important to know which strains you need to use to treat different issues, and which strains you are putting into your body as supplements as well, or that you are eating in different types of food. You want to make sure that you have the right ones to do the right jobs. So some produce vitamins, some destroy cells that cause diseases for you, and others help you process food. Still others will go ahead and fight off other levels of different microorganisms within your body and keep them in place. We're going to go on a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about an example of how this works in the human body. Stay tuned. If you're stuck for ideas about how to develop your logo, your website design, or your business cards to bring your entrepreneurial baby to life, Design Crowd can give you access to 750,000 creative minds from across the globe. From San Francisco to Sydney, designers will begin submitting quality designs for you as soon as you launch your brief on Design Crowd. Instead of paying some really expensive fees and having to wait weeks for an agency to pitch an idea that you ultimately end up hating, you can have exactly what you need within as little as 3 days. You can provide some constructive feedback as well to help guide the designers towards what really fits your needs. Once you've selected your favorite design, then you're sent all of the files that you need to update your branding. If for some reason you just don't like any of the submitted designs, then Design Crowd offers a money-back guarantee. As a special offer for our listeners, right now you can go to designcrowd.com/health and wellness. Again, that's DESIGNCROWD.com/health and wellness with no spaces. Or simply enter the discount code Health and Wellness when you post a project on Design Crowd to get up to $150 off when you start any project. That's designcrowd.com/health and wellness, or entering the discount code Health and Wellness when you post your project today.
Are you looking to learn more about the latest trends from the fitness world? Are you confused by all of the different trends that are out there? The GSMC Fitness Podcast is the place for you. The GSMC Fitness Podcast is the place to come for people of all skill and interest levels. Join us as we explore the latest trends in the fitness world. Does that new exercise really work? Should I try yoga? Whatever your question, chances are good you'll find an answer on the GSMC Fitness Podcast.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about probiotics in general, what they are, how they can be affected by antibiotics, and so on and so forth. Now we're going to go ahead and talk about the ecosystem that is your microbiome. So for example, think about it like an ecosystem, and it is an ecosystem. So just like you hear the term biome when you're studying ecological systems in science class in school, this is called the microbiome, and it is the level of life and the environment that these creatures are inhabiting, these microorganisms. Get it? But adults can also get it. So you can get those symptoms from taking antibiotics, especially if they're high powered or you're on a prolonged course of them. So at that point, you might be killing those bacteria that are normally populating your mouth and keeping that yeast at bay in your throat and in your mouth. So you want to make sure that you're taking those probiotics to help prevent that. Because if you don't, it looks kind of like snakes in the wild in Florida. So this is a little bit dicey of a comparison, but bear with me. So the only reason it's dicey is because Burmese pythons are not native to the Everglades in Florida, but there are other large snakes in that area. So if people are flushing these Burmese pythons down the toilet or just dumping them into the Everglades, and then they end up fighting with these alligators, a lot of folks initially thought that the alligators would just go ahead and fight them off on their own. But they breed differently from each other. Their sex is also determined differently from each other. So with these giant creatures, when they're able to reproduce, can also be quite different. Although I believe their clutch sizes are generally about the same in the average size. But for these types of reptiles, you have to get to a certain size and or a certain age in order to be able to reproduce. So sometimes it's just whichever one comes first. So for these creatures, they can compete each other. And if we don't get a good handle on these snakes, which are causing a lot of problems for these alligators, it can cause cascade effects within their ecosystem, just like changing these levels of different probiotics in your body can change the other levels of your microbiome. So in this way, I want you to think about these creatures. So like, you normally already have this bacteria in there, and it is your alligators. And then think about the large snakes that are also in Florida, but you've also added something else in there. You've added these giant snakes. And so now these giant snakes are out competing these alligators, or the yeast is out competing the bacteria because there are just not enough alligators in comparison to the snakes, or not enough bacteria compared to the yeast. because you've entered another party into this. In this case, it's essentially humans dumping snakes in there. And for your body, it's going to be the antibiotics that are killing those probiotics or the microflora that's naturally in your body. So in that case, it's going to suddenly be not so even anymore, and suddenly the snakes or the yeast is going to have a really big advantage. And that's essentially what's going on in your body. It is like an ecosystem, and it's called the microbiome. So that's why I really don't want you to think of bacteria and other microorganisms like yeast as being truly bad. Not all microorganisms are bad for you. Some are actually really helpful. And most of the microorganisms, or at least a lot of them, that are in our probiotics are the same or at least very similar to the ones that live naturally in our bodies. So that leads me to what type of bacteria are in probiotics. Well, it can be a bunch of different types, but two of the most common are from the groups Lactobacillus and Bifidobacterium. So those are two of the main types. You may have also heard of others like Acidophilus, but for today, we're going to mostly focus on Lactobacillus and Bifidobacterium. Although you may also see some other bacteria like Acidophilus in probiotics, you may also see yeast. So one of the third most common probiotic materials is actually Saccharomyces boulardii, which is a fungus. So yes, yeasts are fungi. So let's talk a little bit about how that works and why it matters which ones are in your probiotics. So firstly, different types of probiotics can have very different effects on your body. So a specific type of lactobacillus, a specific strain or species, can help you prevent an illness, but that does not necessarily mean that another type of lactobacillus or acidophilus or bifidobacterium would do the same thing. Similarly, a yeast like Saccharomyces boulardii might not do the same thing. They may be more effective in combination with each other as well, or they may be less effective. So we want to make sure that we have the correct ones for the specific issue that we're having, and that we don't have anything that's going to be problematic in there, or anything that's going to be unnecessary, as a lot of probiotics can be sold and they don't necessarily have to be truly beneficial 100% for them to make certain claims. They just can't be harmful. So if they have something good in there, like some of the really good lactobacillus strains or Saccharomyces boulardii, then they can also just put filler stuff in there. We don't want that stuff. So it's important that we know what these labels mean, even when we're reading things like Bifidobacterium. You may be wondering, well, just how different are they? I'm going to explain. So I want to talk to you guys about phylogenetic trees. I know that's a crazy word, but think of it like family trees in a way. So they tell us how creatures and anything that is alive, like plants or fungi, are related to each other. And so with your family tree, you start out with like your great-grandfather and grandmother, right? And you have them at the top of the tree, and then you have lines under each of them showing, that they got together and then they had this many children, and these children married this people, and then these are their children, and so on and so forth down through the generations until you get to you. And that is the end point of it if you don't have any children of your own at that time. So that's very similar to how these relatedness trees work with different species. But think about it by turning it the other way. So instead of seeing the endpoints necessarily, we also are very interested in seeing where it came from. So where it diverged versus just where families converged or merged together to get to you. We can also work that backwards with these relatedness trees. So the way that we do that as well is we go and we say, what do these things have the most in common? And what is that on like a basic level? So we have these rankings for it in the field of taxonomy, which is pretty much the scientific naming of things. And so you go through about 44 of them, but more or less they're kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species is what you're looking at. And so at the kingdom level, at the very top, that is really broad. That's like when you're playing a game of 20 questions and you start out by going animal, vegetable, or mineral. And indeed, that is more or less what it is, except since minerals are non-living things and animals and plants are living things, this is only for living things. Geology has their own set of rules. So for our purposes, we have in the US 6 different categories. In the UK and a lot of other areas, they still just use 5. They combine 2 of the categories together into 1, which is like where they put the bacteria and so on. But the ones that they generally have in common are going to be animal, plant, fungi, protista, and then the archaeobacteria, which are just like extreme hardcore bacteria that live in volcanoes or super salty places or Antarctica. They're like the hardcore bacteria. And then also regular bacteria as we think of them. So those are your 5 to 6 categories, with those last 2 just being combined over in some other countries. But the US and Canada, we use those 6. And so when we're thinking about these, bacteria and fungi and humans are quite different. But for humans, we can't even compare quite at that level because bacteria and fungi are up at the kingdom level. And if you follow humans all the way back up to where that is for us, that's just under animalia, animals. So at that point, we have a long way between us and them. It's very similar in a way of just going, hey, this is a plant, this is an animal. That is the point of how different we are from these microorganisms and how different that they also are from each other. They are diverged at that high level too. They don't even have enough in common to both be animals or both be bacteria or both be fungi. They're in these really basic separate classes at the very top. So you have yeast, right? We want to specifically talk about the yeast that we have here. And yeast are fungi. So at that kingdom order, the very top, we're going animal, vegetable, fungi, bacterium. That is where this splits off. So there's a sub-kingdom in there too. So remember I told you we'd use 6 main ones, but there's like 44 sub-classifications between these levels and beneath these levels, like species and subspecies. That might sound a little bit more familiar. So when we're looking at this, at the very, very top, we have kingdom, fungi, and bacteria is next to fungi, and animal is next to that, etc. But they're all on the same level. But directly under that, there is a sub-kingdom of yeast within fungi. So fungi it's a very broad area, but yeast is so different from all the other types of fungi that they are not even in that same trajectory at the second level out of 44 where we split them. And it gets more complicated than that. There's a whole bunch of different ways that you split them, and people argue over it all the time in science. We just call it another Tuesday in paleoanthropology. But you get where I'm coming from with this. So you're trying to find their commonalities and their differences to see where they descended from certain ones and where they split off from their fellows. And so yeast splits off at a very high level, at level 2 out of like 44. So it's very different from even other types of fungi. It's the same enough that you are able to go ahead and treat fungal infections, like yeast infections, with antifungals, even though they're very different from everything else. But you're still able to treat them with the same thing because yeast are considered to be fungi in the taxonomic order because they do have enough in common that they can be treated in a lot of ways by the same types of materials. So that is why your doctor will give you an antifungal for a yeast infection or for oral thrush if your baby has it. So I hope that makes sense. We're going to go on a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk some more about how these organisms are different from each other and from us, and why you can't just substitute one for another.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about how taxonomy, the science of naming things, really works. And we started out by talking about the kingdom level, where we're splitting them up like animal, vegetable, fungi, bacteria, and telling everything apart at a very basic level. Like there's a very apparent difference between bacteria and an animal of any type that you think of, whether that be a whale. A whale and a human are more alike than a whale and bacteria, at least according to taxonomists today. Just kidding. That's a taxonomy joke, but I respect the craft. All right. So we talked about yeast, and we know that yeast splits off from fungi really far up there. So it is in the subkingdom. It is a subkingdom. So now we're going to split next to it with bacteria. So we're going up a level and back over. So we're on that very top level, and we have fungi and then bacteria and animals and plants and stuff. So with these bacteria, you have lactobacillus and bifidobacterium in here that are what your body really needs with probiotics in a lot of ways. These are the two that we're specifically focusing on. Remember, there's a whole bunch of different types. With these two types of bacteria, you're going all the way down this hierarchy of taxonomy, so the taxonomic hierarchy, and that being like kingdom or domain, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. And then, of course, you have the subcategories. So when we're looking at this, at the very top of this is where we're splitting it from everything else. This is a bacteria. And then right after that, this splits off and goes in two different directions. So not exactly right after it, not necessarily in the subkingdom way, but by the phylum, by that next big step that we take down instead of those little increments that may be in between, like subkingdoms and subspecies and stuff. So we're going down from domain/kingdom to your very next level, so your phylum, which is also sometimes called division. And that is where it splits off. So within the second of these several different categories, and especially within like probably the first 5 or so, including the subcategories out of 44 subcategories. So that's where we are already splitting with these bacteria. So again, this is really high up. It's not as high up as per se going through and splitting off the yeast from the fungi, but it is very high up there. They're very different. So we actually split these off really high up, and then we get all the way down and we find out that lactobacillus and bifidobacterium are at the genus level. So genus is like Homo sapiens. So we are Homo sapiens. Homo is our genus. Sapiens is our species. So if you think about that, you can think about other human ancestors that we're closely related to, and think of Homo neanderthalensis, which is the name for Neanderthals. So with that one, that is Homo, their genus, and then Neanderthalensis, the species. So think about how different we are from even Neanderthals, and then think about how that is at the species level. This is down, that's towards the bottom. Whereas with these bacteria, they split way up at the top, and they don't even have the same genus. They don't have the same family or the level above that order or the big level above that class. They have so much that's different between the two of them. It's an even wider difference between us and one of our earlier human ancestors, Homo habilis, who was one of the first to use stone tools. So when you think about chimpanzees and how they can use tools right now, and if you think about the models that anthropologists have made of what these human ancestors may have looked like and how they may have walked, how their bodies were built differently or arranged differently as well, and how they had differences in their jaw sizes and all of these things that can change even within the same genus. When you consider that Lactobacillus is totally different from Bifidobacterium. They're two totally different genera. Not only that, but they are two totally different phyla. That is crazy how far apart that they are and how little that they may have in common. Now, they also do have a lot in common, just like genetically we have a lot in common with bananas. You can Google that. It's true. You have a lot of DNA in common with a lot of different creatures out there, but these are very different creatures in their own right in that way. So really what I'm getting at is that think about the difference in a job exchange program, right? Imagine a job exchange program in which you have to trade places for the day with a chimpanzee. So they are somewhat related to you. You're both animals, you're both mammals, you're even both primates. So primates is the order level. Just to put that into perspective, that is 2 levels above genus. It's 2 levels above Homo, right? And the primate level is the order. So that's where we are grouped in a suborder with other types of primates that are closer to us. They used to be called the anthropoids, which means human-like, and then they had to rearrange that and to put some more animals in it, so they had to change the name. So now, though, we're still in that group with great apes like chimpanzees, because we are technically a great ape. That's part of our classification system. So think about that, though. Think about how different we are from chimpanzees. You would not be able to take a chimpanzee and bring him into my home and have him do my job with any real manner of success. Or maybe he'd be great at it. Who knows? Let's try this program, see how it works. But you also could not send me out into the wild to do his job and think that I was going to do a good job at it. Our survival techniques are totally different. His are more natural. Humans are now more cultural in many ways as we have developed specialization of trade, and everyone relies on everyone else in a much different way. Whereas typically in the wild, chimpanzees are pretty much going to have the same tools in between chimps. Now they do have social structures and everything, but that's another thing I would have to learn. I don't know enough about that to go and do this job swap with a chimpanzee right now. I would be just as bad at his job or his way of life as he would be at mine. And we're in the same order at that point. We are very close to each other as relatives. Similarly, I don't think I'd do that great in a job swap with Homo neanderthalensis. Granted, I would also require a time machine, but I digress. I wouldn't do great at it, is what I'm saying. So why does that matter? Why am I talking about all of these different types of primates when we started out talking about bacteria? Well, that's because these bacteria have very specific ways that they work as well. They may have a lot in common, but we can't just stop at the level of going, oh, well, they're just bacteria. No, it's very complicated, and they have even less in common than we do in some ways between these different types of probiotics, if we look at it from a taxonomic point of view. And that's the same way with humans and other types of great apes. We are even closer than they are, but they don't necessarily work the same way, just like we don't. And it doesn't mean that one is better than the other in any way or by any means. But what it does mean is that you can't take a lactobacillus and expect for it to do the job of a bifidobacterium or Saccharomyces boulardii any more than you could expect for a chimp to swap out with your job and it be an easy, accurate one-for-one swap. So I wanted to illustrate that background and taxonomy and how phylogenetic trees typically work to really illustrate solidly the differences between these different bacteria. I also like to say that it's very similar to going, hey, I think I want a steak for dinner. And your friend is like, yeah, let's have rattlesnake tonight. And you're like, wait, what? No, I don't want that. Why would I want rattlesnake for dinner? It's a totally different texture. It's a different flavor. You cook it differently. Why would I do that? And they go, well, they're both animals. It's not the same. You can't just substitute one out for the other. You also can't go, oh, I really wish that I had a cheeseburger right now. And somebody goes, oh yeah, let's go get some salads. And you're like, wait, what? I said I wanted that animal, and now this is a plant that you are trying to feed me. These are in totally different kingdoms. A cheeseburger and a steak are not the same as a salad or a snake. You can quote me on that. People are going to look at you really funny, but you guys, it rhymes. And if you explain the joke really far in advance, like I just did, then they'll also understand where you're coming from. Although that wasn't meant to be a joke, that just ended up rhyming. So that is what we are looking at, though. It's kind of a silly comparison, but it gets the point across that these things are not interchangeable. Similarly, prebiotics are not the same as probiotics. They are just spelled very similarly. All right, guys, we're going to go on a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk some more about prebiotics. We're also going to talk about specifically how probiotics work. If you're anything like me, then you find having to wait to be the enemy of efficiency. Not getting things done in a timely manner drives me bonkers. And that's why I love Design Crowd. You can crowdsource just about any creative project on Design Crowd, from logo creation and WordPress design to even banner ads and tattoos. Design Crowd is really great for launching a new logo or even reworking an existing design. As soon as you post your brief on Design Crowd, you have access to their 750,000 creatives who are distributed around the world to submit their designs for you to look over. Instead of waiting for weeks for an agency to pitch an idea to you, you can have results and options in 3 days to a week, but still only have to pay for the one that you like the best. Right now is a special deal for our listeners. If you go to designcrowd.com/health and wellness or enter health and wellness no spaces as the discount code when you post a project on Design Crowd, you'll get $150 off as our VIP offer. That's designcrowd.com/health and wellness, DESIGNCROWD.com/health and wellness. Get your perfect design today.
The GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
discussing how these different types of bacteria and yeast are used as probiotics, and yet how different they are from each other, and that they can be even more different from us than our human ancestors and our primate brethren. So it's important that we keep in mind as well that you can't just substitute one of these in for the other. You can't sub in a lactobacillus for a bifidobacterium any more than a chimpanzee and I would be successful in trying to job swap. Not even for a week. I'm not thinking I'm going to do really great for that week that I'm swapping with this chimpanzee. He'll be fine. My house will be a mess. He might eat my cat, but it's like living with Alf at that point. We'll figure it out. Actually, that'll be my roommate's problem, right? So back to probiotics. We can look at probiotics in a few different ways. They have a variety of effects on the body. Different ones act in different ways. Different strains work differently, especially as they are applied to different types of illness. So, probiotics can help your body maintain a healthy microbiome, that community of your microorganisms that includes bacteria and yeast, etc. It can also help your body come back from getting wrecked. So if your body has had a really big disruption in its microbiome, so say before this episode, you did not know that taking antibiotics and probiotics together at the same time would cancel out the probiotics, or you didn't know about probiotics at all in that context, and you didn't know that it could prevent against diarrhea while you're on antibiotics, or it could prevent against yeast infections on antibiotics, then you might not know that you could take them afterwards, and it could help you out a lot. And if you're already on antibiotics, just talk to your doctor about it, and they'll probably go ahead and give you the go-ahead for taking probiotics while you're on it, as long as you are taking the probiotics and the antibiotics with a couple of hours in between each other. So making sure that they're not too close to each other to cancel, for the antibiotics to cancel out the probiotics. So it can help your body come back from being really wrecked by how much of the good bacteria in your body has been a casualty of the antibiotics trying to take out the bad bacteria. I want you to think about your microbiome as being like the Pride Lands in The Lion King. So remember, first, everything's really lush. It looks all Great Valley, like the land before time, and everything looks super green and amazing. And then Scar comes and takes over, and they absolutely desolate everything. Like the Pride Lands look really sad after Scar and the hyenas just run through all of the animals that are in the Pride Land. If you are a non-lion animal, then they go through and they eat you, or you run off somewhere. So when Simba comes back and he fights Scar and overthrows him and then takes over the Pride Lands, remember, everything turns back to being green again. And in this way, that's kind of what antibiotics does to some of the good bacteria in your body sometimes. So the antibiotics is Scar, and Simba is probiotics. So remember, a lot of these probiotics are the same as, or at least very similar to, the natural microflora in your mouth. They are just grown in a lab. They're cultured. So cultured just means grown in a lab for this context. So you're just putting those back in where they belong. So Simba leaves. He gets driven out by Scar. A lot of the other animals also get driven out by Scar. And so Scar is the antibiotics in there, just destroying everything that he touches. And then when more probiotics come in at an appropriate time that is well delayed after the initial encounter, because if Simba had tried to fight Scar at that point, he would not have made it. He was a cub. So at that point, it's coming in at a later time. So it's like you took it 2 hours later. And now it is making up for the fact that the antibiotics had been there. So once the antibiotics leaves the Pride Land area, /Scar leaves your microbiome, then you are going to be able to have everything start flourishing again. Everything's going to come back. It's going to be the Great Valley. all over again, and it's going to be solid because Simba, your probiotics, have now been restored and everything can go back to the natural balance of things. I think that that's the most fun way to explain probiotics in my experience for having your microbiome return to a healthy condition after it's been disturbed. It can also help you produce substances that have desirable effects, and it can help influence your body's immune response as well. That's how probiotics work. I say it, really I should say they. It's plural, probiotics. You guys get where I'm coming from. So these probiotics are very fascinating, and these researchers have been studying them for a long time. Different probiotics can handle different issues or affect different issues in different ways. So there was a 2018 study that was meta-research, so meta-analysis or a review, we've talked about that before, in a journal called Frontiers in Medicine. And so they looked at a ton of previous research and found that a lot of these bacteria strains are very specific regarding which types you need for different illnesses. So different ones work in different ways. They target different areas as well. So, for example, in the intestinal tract as well as in the vagina, these types of areas are very finely balanced ecosystems. So you have these lactobacilli strains that are usually very dominant, and they normally work by making the environment around them too acidic for these infectious or harmful microorganisms to survive. So they keep them in check by raising the acid levels in your body. So the good news is that they're already in there and they're doing their job, and it's hard for things to go sideways. The bad news is if you take an antibiotic and you don't have enough probiotics, whether through eating yogurt and kefir and kimchi and those fermented goods that we talked about earlier, or by taking a supplement, you can get your system thrown out of whack. So, a very scientific term for that can really mess up the levels of the acidity in those areas. So when there's not enough bacteria because the antibiotics has killed the good bacteria too, then those other types of microorganisms that are in that ecosystem, it may not even be the ones that the antibiotic is attacking. So it might not be another bacterium. It could be something like the regular Candida albicans, the regular yeast that you find in your body. Now that's not the only type, but it is the most common. And if you have that antibiotic in there attacking, of course, something that is a bacterium, because you want an antifungal typically for a fungal infection like yeast infections are, then you have a different problem. So now that antibiotic might be clearing out the infection that you had due to the bacteria, but it might also be killing a lot of the good lactobacilli that are in your body that are keeping these other materials at bay by keeping the threshold of their pH more acidic than normal. So once they're not there to hold down the fort, so to speak, then the barriers that they were projecting for you are also now gone. So you don't have your defense system anymore. Now, these may also just seem like, oh, okay, it's just a yeast infection, like it's unpleasant and everything, but it's not something that necessarily usually kills people. However, under normal circumstances, Candida albicans won't. But for people who have a weakened immune system, so they're immunocompromised, certain factors can help that fungus survive on their body in different places, and it can penetrate into deeper tissues and organs. And that can make it very dangerous for people who are immunocompromised. According to some doctors, it is a major cause of death in people who have weakened immune systems. Now, I also point that out for a couple of reasons. I want to make sure that we all understand how these things work in our bodies, but I also want us to keep in mind that a yeast infection is generally for most people, just annoying. Men tend to get them under their armpits from sweating and not changing their gym clothes as frequently. And women can also get them in the vaginal area. Anyone can get them in the mouth, but it tends to mostly be babies that get the oral thrush. But you can get that at any age. So think about how that is, and if you or anyone you've known has had it, and how it's usually viewed as just being gross, but nothing that you would think that's truly super harmful, just gross and annoying. But for people who are immunocompromised, getting even a yeast infection with the regular C. albicans, which is detected in about 40 to 60% of healthy adults, can really actually kill them. Now I want you to think about COVID-19. Think about SARS-CoV-2, coronavirus. Think about how many people that this has killed already who are not necessarily immunocompromised and who aren't even immunocompromised to a huge degree. We're not talking about someone who has no immune system, like the boy in the plastic bubble. We're not talking about that specifically, or even people who have their immune system suppressed because they're on chemo. We are talking about a bunch of people who were nurses and stuff, and who were deemed to be healthy enough to be in contact with these people for their job, but they were unable to fight off this virus. Their body was unable to do it. Now think about these people who have the immune system that is at a point where a yeast infection can kill them, that it is a major cause of death in folks who have yeast infections who are also immunocompromised. Think about how quickly and how many people could really be very harmed by getting this disease, this SARS-CoV-2. I want you guys to think about that when you are going through the social distancing. I know that we're a week in it for some people. For other people, you're in it for just a couple days so far, and others multiple weeks. And I get that everyone seems really restless on social media in particular, and a lot of my friends are really frustrated with it, and they're complying with it, but people are going stir crazy. People are getting cabin fever, and that's normal. Don't feel bad about that. It's okay. But we have to make sure that we are being responsible in as many ways as we possibly can to protect those of us who are out there who have weakened immune systems. You want to act like you are protecting the person who is most at risk for one of these things. You could act like you are a person who is immunocompromised if that helps you to pretend that you are in this situation where it is a huge deal for you. You can also think about it, my favorite way to think about it, is though you already have it and you're trying to avoid transmitting germs rather than trying to avoid catching them. Think about it that way. And that way when you're at the grocery store, don't pick up like 7 things and keep touching everything. And if you touch one thing and then go and touch a different product and you keep touching things, you're going to cross-contaminate your food and your body. I know that we're all sometime into this at this point, and we had been talking about it in the news a little bit, rolling forward and leading up to it, but I want you guys to remember now how weird it was when we first all had to start working from home, where people who are contracted to these large organizations are now letting their folks work at home, when before that was not deemed possible. I don't know if you guys have tried to buy a webcam recently, but I was trying to get one for my Twitch stream and I was just having trouble deciding which one to get. And I waited too long because the orders for folks to stay at home and work from home went into place, and now all of the Logitech Brios are sold out everywhere. They're back ordered absolutely everywhere because folks are having to work from home, and that is a webcam. I think that one's probably sold out because not only can you attach it to your computer, but also to your Xbox and stuff. So everyone who's playing video games at home, the kids want them, the parents need them for work, etc. And I imagine that sometimes the company is buying it for you. So I imagine there were a lot of bulk orders of these, and for a lot of different reasons that all come back to coronavirus, but I want you to think about that. Think about when this first started and how things were just very apparently sideways, where it's like, whoa, we're all having to work at home right now. Okay, we've got to figure out how to get everybody to work at home now. And now also all the planes are empty. And at first, people were excited about those really cheap plane tickets, but then you see the pictures of people who were actually on those planes, and most of it behind them is empty. Like, there's a reason that this is going so crazy for everyone. It is very serious, even if we are getting annoyed with each other and familiarity is breeding contempt. But it's very important that we keep this in mind, that a yeast infection can kill people who are immunocompromised, and in fact is a common cause of deaths for people who are immunocompromised. And if something as small and just gross and annoying as a yeast infection could kill them, I want you to think about all the people who may be in your life who are just not out really about having these invisible disorders, because immune system disorders are very often invisible in nature. Unless the person tells you, you cannot tell that they have it. And there are so many different types. And that also includes folks who have respiratory issues like asthma. It includes folks who are at increased risk due to having diabetes or cardiovascular disorders, as we discussed in a previous episode. So I wanted to really contextualize that for you guys. We're going to go on a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about whether you should take probiotics according to Harvard Health, and we are also going to talk about the possible benefits for your health in drinking the bacteria that's in wine. Stay tuned.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about probiotics and how those are related to yeast infections, how that really works in your body, and how it can really hurt immunosuppressed people. We also drew some correlations between how people who have immune systems that are compromised are more susceptible to dying from even innocuous things for the rest of us, like yeast infections, and how correspondingly coronavirus can be exponentially worse for them in a way that I think a lot of us have not truly been conceptualizing and understanding, as many people have still been going to visit their friends and having parties and going out to see other people at the river because they're getting stir crazy, or even just milling around the grocery store. Get in and get out, everybody. You're putting everybody at risk, including the workers, the longer that you're in there. So now we're going to talk about whether or not Harvard Health thinks you should take probiotics. And we are also going to talk about whether the bacteria in wine may have health benefits. Fingers crossed, you guys. So, should you take probiotics? They're technically not formally recommended, but the FDA and them don't have a problem with people selling them as long as they are not making claims that have not been proven empirically. So, with scientific studies. Probiotics are those good bacteria, but sometimes we need more information to tell us if and when they're safe and effective for all parties involved. So it may differ depending upon age. We need to do these studies and find out. Some of the benefits are that microbes in your lower GI tract, which is where most of your microbes in your body are located, by the way, they are down there to help us digest food and fight some of those harmful bacteria and regulate our immune system. The majority of the microorganisms in your body are in your colon. So that's about 0.4 liters, 0.4 liters of volume in your entire body. That's not a lot. Think about a 2 liter. Now think about like a quarter of that, but less, because it's a 2 liter and it's 0.4. So it's almost 0.5, just for the visual reference sake. Go ahead and think about it that way. So 0.4 liters is how much is where your colon is. And that is where the majority of this bacteria is stored. That's just where it lives its life. So a recent study has suggested that we don't actually have 10 times more bacteria in our bodies than we have human cells. So this is something that has been a common understanding since around 1972, when a microbiologist performed a really great study, but perhaps was not able to see all of this that we are now. And I don't think that it was meant to be included in other conversations. A lot of scientists argue that this was really a throwaway comment that this person made. But we've been saying that in the media and everything for years. So I went ahead and Googled it, and I was like, what is the actual ratio here? How much is really the difference between the two? And it turns out it's usually about a 1-to-1 ratio. So they referenced like a reference guy, so he was about 25 years old, average weight, average height, etc. And this guy had almost a 1-to-1 ratio of how much human cells, how many human cells he had versus how many bacterial cells that he had in his body. And they said, of course, there's going to be human variation. Sometimes you'll have half that much bacteria. Sometimes somebody will have twice that much, and that's just their normal. It just depends on human variation. But it's pretty cool, in my opinion, and it turns out that it's not 10 times. So they're saying, it might be a significant amount more, but it's not going to be near that 10-to-1 ratio of bacterial cells to human cells that we had previously supposed. So I just wanted to share that new science fact with you that's come out in the past few years. So these microbes, though, that are in our lower GI tract, help us to digest our food and do all this other stuff. But they're in our lower GI tract. And when things go sideways, we can get diarrhea and other health problems. So think about when you're getting those antibiotics and they're like, okay, better take your probiotics, or you can get diarrhea from not having enough in your body and the antibiotics killing all the bacteria. And you're like, oh no! And that is exactly what's happening. And since most of that bacteria is down there, that's the antibiotics going in and wiping out the normal flora, and it is really messing with your pH levels and stuff as well, and things are not growing the same way that they normally would. These microorganisms are growing at different rates. So you are having a huge imbalance in this ecosystem, like the snakes and the alligators. And when you are at this point, it can also cause other health problems. So we want to make sure that we take these probiotics to help restore that balance in the ecosystem. These probiotics have also secreted like protective substances for your body that can help with your immune system. It can help activate it and prevent different pathogens from getting a foothold in your body and can help it from creating major disease. It can limit them in number and in that way also the severity of what you're experiencing. We're still learning a lot about probiotics though and how they may help you. Probiotics taken as a supplement have also been said to reduce the number of colds that you may have in a year. They're also often used for gastrointestinal symptoms, which makes sense now that we know that most of them are in your colon. That's totally makes a lot of sense. That's what's causing the intestinal distress, and that's where we have to restore them in order to get everything to go back to normal. So some types of gastrointestinal symptoms you might get may include gas, bloating, and constipation. And they're wanting to do some more studies to determine who gets symptom improvement and see what the variables are for those. So is there any variation between older people and younger people? Is there something based on age or the immune system context that they already had? They want to know more. So they're going to be studying that. A lot of types of probiotics are on the market, and some have been very well studied and others haven't. So you want to make sure that you're taking the correct ones. Make sure that if you get these, they are dietary supplements and not drugs. So they're not regulated the same way by the FDA. They're not monitoring how these are manufactured. So we're not sure right now which brands are the best per se. Your doctor may have a better grasp on that. But if you want to Google that, I encourage you to Google it from a source that is unrelated to the brand to make sure that it's not just a company going, hey, we paid some guy to do research for us and it says we're cool. So we're cool. You want to make sure that that's not what's happening. So if you're going to try to be getting probiotics, a lot of them can be gotten from really good foods. You don't even have to take the supplements for them necessarily. But if you like plain Greek yogurt, that is one of the best ways to get it. And they say plain because you want to make sure there's no sugar added. That's not just for your general health, although y'all know how I feel about that, and making sure we're trying to not eat that many things that have sugar added, except for my caramel macchiatos. And we also want to make sure that we can not make it any worse in our bodies. So a lot of microorganisms love sugar. They thrive on it. It helps them grow and proliferate. And so whenever I get sick and I don't know if it's a virus versus these other things, I'll go ahead and just stop drinking any type of sugar that I can. I try to not feed it. I think about the types of sugars that are added in my foods, the types that are inherent in different ways, and different types of sugars like milk sugars and everything else, and reduce the sugar from my diet as much as possible. I'm not worried about the viruses. I'm more concerned about like yeast and bacteria. Remember, these yeast are different from the cooking yeast though. Very different organisms. But you want to make sure you're giving your body your best shot. So if you're getting the yogurt for this, try to get a plain kind. You can mix it into something else if you want. Blend it with an avocado, my dude. It'll be dope. Eat it with some naan. I'm here for it. You can also eat it with kefir. It's a type of dairy drink, so think of it like the Yakult yogurt type beverage that is mostly just meant to be probiotics. And it comes in a really small container. It's like 1 to 2 ounces. So they almost look like little miniature orange juice bottles or, you know, those old type of milk bottles where it's just like a literal plastic bottle of milk. It looks kind of like that, but like very small. And then you have fermented vegetables like pickles, sauerkraut, kimchi. There's all kinds of stuff. If you like kombucha, go for it, my dude. There's probiotics in there, and you can really benefit from those in a lot of ways. But again, make sure that you talk to your doctor before you begin any probiotics regimen. I'm going to tell you guys the same thing, whether it is a Western medication or if it's an essential oil or if it's a probiotic, even though this is something that's in your body already. You need to talk to your doctor. Make sure you take it as it is mentioned by your doctor. Make sure that you're also reading the labels for these and don't take too many of them. You can mess up your body with having vitamin toxicity, like we talked about previously, and you can also get bacteremia in your body by having an overgrowth of these different bacteria. So remember, those candida bacteria that's found in 40 to 60% of healthy people's bodies only go out of balance and go crazy and mess with your body when they're out of balance with the bacteria that are supposed to be there regulating your pH levels and everything else, keeping the yeast growth in check. So think about it the other way and how perhaps in different situations having too much bacteria could be a problem, even if it's something that is normally already in your body, just like the candida yeast in this example. So let's make sure that we don't take too much of that. Bacteremia specifically means that you have bacterial cells in your blood. They are somewhere they should not be. So think about septicemia, that means you have an infection in your blood. You think about the word anemia, that means your blood is low in iron. So that's what we're talking about here, blood, emia, and we are specifically talking about bacteremia, so an infection in your blood. We don't want that, so make sure that you're not taking too much of this so that these aren't going wandering. Check the colony forming unit amount and talk to your doctor about it, and just make sure that your normal diet is not going to cause you to be getting too much of this in your body as well. It can also be specifically problematic for people who have an immune deficiency or who are being treated for cancer. So make sure that you talk to your doctor about that. Although I expect that folks who are in those situations don't need to hear that from me. They've probably heard it from a doctor and been living with it their whole lives. So I'm not trying to explain that to y'all who already know. I'm here to explain it to the folks who maybe didn't know and broaden some of that awareness. So the bacteria that you find in probiotics, there's about 3,000 or so different species. But the most common types are those lactobacillus and the bifidobacterium we discussed. They're usually freeze-dried, but they're still alive when you take the supplement. And then they warm up in your digestive system and become active. So don't feel too grossed out while you're putting it in your mouth. They're not active until you swallow them. And then they come out with that little gel and they warm up and they start doing their thing. So you can find those probiotics in a ton of different stores and supermarkets. You can get them from your pharmacy. And they're usually capsules or tablets that you can swallow. There's also some that comes in a form of powder to sprinkle on food. So you could perhaps put it in your protein shake or something, as long as you're not taking your antibiotics within 2 hours of going to the gym and having that protein shake. You do want to make sure the product explicitly has a sell-by date. Make sure you check the dosages because those are going to vary by product, and make sure that you keep an eye on that. Very similar to how vitamins are sold by different manufacturers and in different amounts. So you want to make sure that you're checking out what's going on. There's no general dosing recommendation that I can just give you because there are so many different potential types of bacterium to be used in there. 3,000 kinds, you guys. And the dosages are all going to be different. So probiotics are not a thing where you can just go, take 2 pills and call me in the morning. This is something where you really need to make sure you're reading the labels and you're discussing it with your doctor and you're doing your research on it and making sure that you have the correct amount and the correct type for what you're trying to treat. That's really what doctors and pharmacists are there for, is there to help you troubleshoot through what you need to treat and how to treat it. So they first go, what is the problem? Okay, now how do we fix this? It just works like troubleshooting in computers as well, you guys. It's just a different type. Or diagnosing the issues that are going on with a car and fixing it. So let them do their jobs. You wouldn't try to just jump in and do what your mechanic is doing. Make sure that you go to your doctor's appointments informed, but also open to what the experts have to say. So here we are. A lot of common dosages range from 5 billion to 10 billion colony-forming units, often written on there as CFUs, per day. Then you take 1 dose per day, typically. That is what is most common, but again, they widely vary. Read the labels, talk to your doctor. Also consider how much of it you may be getting in your food with a regular diet that you already follow, or how you may supplement it going forward. All right, we're going to go on a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the potential benefits for your health and getting bacteria from wine. Stay tuned.
GSMC Beauty Tips Podcast gives you advice on everything from hair to fashion to skincare products. We'll talk about the latest trends in makeup, hairstyles, and anti-aging remedies. And we'll cover all of the newest fashion trends. If you have an interest in or questions about the beauty trends that might work best for you, the Golden State Media Concepts Beauty Tips Podcast has got you covered. Download the GSMC Beauty Tips Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking all about how the most common species of bacteria that's used in probiotics, about 3,000 or so of those, belong to the genera Lactobacillus or Bifidobacterium, like what we discussed earlier. So there's so many different strains, and Lactobacillus and Bifidobacterium are quite different from each other, and the strains that they use, their species of each, even though there's about 3,000 of them, those are all going to be a little bit different. A lot of them are going to be able to be used for the same types of issues, like urogenital issues or GI tract issues. So it's just important that we get the correct strains for the correct diseases and follow along what this research is really telling us. So, with that in mind, let's talk about the fun part. Let's talk about whether the bacteria that is in wine might bring you health benefits. So we did a previous episode on wine and found that for the most part, wine is not all that healthy for us. After all, the amounts of resveratrol that we would have to get into our bodies will require such crazy amounts of wine as to really mess our bodies up. And I mean like hundreds of glasses per day to thousands of glasses per day in order to replicate the research that they performed on mice that found that these huge doses of resveratrol were helping the mice. But that's another podcast. You guys are welcome to go back and listen to that one if you want. Right now, even though we found that resveratrol and stuff is not as great for us in these low doses of that healthy single glass of wine per day or alcohol per day for women and up to 2 per men up to age 65, then we also are going to see if maybe the bacteria can be good for us. It's fermented, right? It's no different from sauerkraut. Let's see if we can get some probiotics from wine, you guys. Although you probably shouldn't take alcohol and antibiotics at the same time. Talk to your doctors, kids. Anyway, there's bacteria in wine that might be beneficial for people's health. They performed a study in Spain and found 11 strains of bacteria in wine, including strains of Lactobacillus, which is one of those we talked about that's commonly used as a probiotic and is also a genus that is found in yogurt. They also found some called Enococcus as well as Pediococcus, and those genera are associated with the winemaking process. So a lot of studies have reported over the years that the best foods to get probiotics from tend to be those cultured or dairy fermented products. And so no one had really studied much about lactobacillus and wine-related probiotics. So they decided to look into it. And part of that reasoning when they conducted the study in 2014 is that there has been an increasing number of people who are lactose intolerant the world over. And there is also that bummer of having cholesterol in your milk as well. Hit up our milk episode to learn more about that. But there's still a lot of cholesterol in fermented dairy products. However, we can maybe see if wine can help us out here. So in this case, probiotics are those live organisms, and they can help you when they are consumed in correct amounts. It can help you with your gut bacteria especially. It may also help lower your cholesterol. So in this study in Spain in 2014, the researchers looked at the ability of the bacteria that they isolated from the wine and wanted to see if they could survive in conditions similar to those in the human GI system. So bacteria in any food product has to be able to survive in a hostile environment like the GI tract in order to have any impact on human health. So if it can't make it through the GI tract alive, then it's not going to be helpful at that point. It might as well have been killed by the antibiotics in your stomach, or you have never taken the pill at all, right? So they have to make sure it's going to survive the journey in order to establish that colony in the Great Valley. So that's what they're going for. So at this point, the bacteria is being studied by the researchers to see whether the wine bacteria could survive if they exposed it to simulated gastric juice, so stomach acid, bile, lysozyme, and that is an enzyme that is super concentrated in human saliva, and it can damage the bacterial cell walls. Overall, they found that the bacteria could survive in such conditions, and that the survival of these types of bacteria was comparable to, or perhaps even better than the survival of a handful of strains of bacteria that have been known to be beneficial to human health. So some of them work as well as, or even better than some that we are already taking for probiotics. So now the investigators are looking at, or did look at, how well the bacteria and the wine could stick to the walls of the human intestine by growing human intestine cells in a lab dish. Science is remarkable, you guys. We are living in the future. They found that the bacteria did stick to the human intestine walls, and that's dope because it needs to be able to stick in order to do anything for your body in that manner. So therefore, they concluded that since it can survive the acidic conditions and all of these different chemicals that your body makes on the voyage down there, and it can cling to the walls to do its job and form the colonies once it gets there, they decided that that may provide beneficial effects, like getting rid of pathogens from places like your intestines. So I thought that was pretty cool, and one particular strain of bacteria that was found in the wine called P. pentosaceus had an excellent, quote unquote, ability to stick to the intestinal wall and good activity against E. coli. So that's pretty awesome. They also found that the probiotic properties of the lactic acid bacteria, when they isolated it from wine, was very similar to that of foods that were dairy in nature. So those cultured dairy products like fermented milk or yogurt, but also like dry sausages and foods that have been fermented like sauerkraut and olives and some types of delicious fruits and even some fish or meat. So that doesn't mean that drinking a couple glasses of wine a day is going to give you the same health benefit as eating something like yogurt. Wine doesn't really give you a sufficient amount of probiotics to be truly beneficial to your health in that manner, because a lot of the bacteria get eliminated in a process called sulfating. Sulfating is that part where they add the sulfites, which are those preservatives that are used often in winemaking. And so you'll also hear a lot of people say that they get headaches when they drink wine. And a lot of folks think that that's due to the sulfites, which are added in that sulfating process. So not only do these sulfites potentially give you a headache and ruin wine for you, but they can also eliminate a lot of those probiotics. So thanks, sulfating, even though you're necessary for stabilizing the wine. Now we are stuck with headaches and also having to eat yogurt instead of drink wine in order to get our probiotics. Sometimes science is a bummer, you guys. I've said it before, and unfortunately I'm saying it again here. However, probiotics could be isolated from wine to commercialize them as new probiotics or added to functional foods. So there's that. It doesn't mean that you can get it necessarily straight from wine, but that's something, right? Technically, a lot of the probiotics in wine are healthful. You just don't get to have them because they're taken out of your wine before it gets to you. I hope this episode about these types of probiotics have been really helpful for you guys, and that we are all on the same page regarding how to seek these out, how related they really are to each other, knowing that they're not interchangeable necessarily with each other, and making sure that we're making the best choices for our bodies and including our doctors on that as we are able to. Thank you for listening to the GSMC Health and Wellness Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'd like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show, and writing a nice review always really helps us. Also, if you could please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, I'd appreciate it. Thank you kindly, and have a good night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Health and Wellness Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.